Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the world. As a lot of you already know, my name is Zach Jones. Welcome back to my channel, but if you're new to my channel, then welcome. I'm reshooting another few PowerPoints, but today I'm going to be shooting just two more before my last one. Now, the first one is about my all-time favourite animal, the Peregrine Falcon. Now, start with what is a peregrine? Now, peregrines are in the falcon family. In fact, they're resident British birds found in rugged, mountainous parts of the country, but also in urban areas. And they are probably the most widespread bird of prey on Earth, and they are also the fastest creature that has ever lived. Ever. Full stop. Of course. Now, where does a peregrine live? Now, peregrines are found all over the world. Of course, they're mostly found in, and as you can see, like rugged, mountainous places, but also, and of course, even at the coast. But in the last few decades, peregrines have learned to live along urban areas, like in cities, and mainly because church steeples and tower blocks are representing the natural homes of these birds, but of course cities aren't usually the typical habitat you find them in. A more natural backdrop would be somewhere wild, rugged and cliff-faced, perhaps at the coast. And you're all probably wondering what they eat. Peregrines are birds that hunt other birds on the wing, so they don't pin their prey to the ground like eagles or hawks. But they mostly feed on crows, game birds like pheasant or grouse, but they will also eat seabirds like puffins, gannets, razorbills, guillemots, cormorants, fulmars, shags, but also other coastal birds like wading birds like curlews, lapwings and oyster catchers, as well as waterfowl like ducks. But their favourite food of all are these pigeons. And of course, pigeons, like peregrines, are probably the most widespread of all birds. In fact, both pigeons and peregrines are found in almost every continent of the world except Antarctica. And of course, what threats have peregrines faced over the years? Well, I mean, because although peregrines were valued in medieval times for the sport of falconry, and so were protected by royalty and nobility, by the late 18th century, the peregrine had begun being targeted by gamekeepers. And of course, persecution of these birds continued right into the 20th century because during World Wars I and II, by order of Parliament, many UK peregrines were killed for posing a danger to carrier pigeons, which carried vital messages to the Allied forces, of course. But in the 1950s, peregrines were also hit hard, most affected by a pesticide called DDT that was used deliberately on birds of prey. Of course, that thinned their eggshells, and peregrines were the most badly affected. However, once the pesticide DDT was banned, numbers of peregrines slowly began to increase. Of course, it's actually amazing of how much of a comeback they've made over the years, because when my mum was a teenager, you had to go to the wilds of Wales to see them. But now, because they've learned to adapt in urban areas, they can be found in cities. In fact, it's actually been shown that peregrines in cities, like urban peregrines, are a lot more successful than their rural counterparts. But, unfortunately, although peregrines are protected by law, they're still being persecuted by egg thieves who steal their eggs or young to be sold on the black market, partly for a demand for peregrines from Middle Eastern falconers, but also peregrines are killed by by people who are quite often known as pigeon fanciers, and they're people who either like pigeons or own pigeons, and quite often they kill peregrines because they either perceive them as a threat to their pigeons, or quite often if they just think that peregrines should be exterminated. But if people are caught doing that, they're quite often arrested, given a fine of probably over £10,000, or face 20 years in jail, which I think is a very suitable punishment. Now, how do peregrines hunt their prey? Well, peregrines, as I mentioned earlier, are birds of prey that catch their prey on the wing. So they don't pin their prey to the ground like an eagle or a hawk. So what they do is they use their secret weapon, which is speed. But first, they need to climb very, very high above their territory, and peregrines actually have very specialised eyesight, because at the base of each retina they have two focal sensors where human beings have only one. Of course, falcons have two, and one's for regular binocular vision and the other is to focus in on anything they see. So they can spot prey like a pigeon from over 2 miles away, and once it's locked onto their target, the peregrine will fold in its wings and perform a dive, which is known as the stoop. And that is the peregrine's weapon. And at dives like that, they can reach their terminal velocity of over 200 miles per hour. Of course, as they dive, wind rushes on the peregrine, but of course, to protect their eyes, they have a nictitating membrane which acts like a pair of goggles. It both clears their eyes of debris and stops their eyes drying out, but also airflow rushes through the nostrils, and that could cause a peregrine's lungs to explode. But they have special cones just inside their nostrils that stop the airflow before it hits the lungs. And of course, that design is now so effective, it's now used in jet engines. And of course, just the moment before impact, the peregrine will unleash its 5-centimetre talons, and then bang! It will strike a pigeon, and of course, the force of the blow could easily snap a pigeon's backbone, killing it instantly. But if the pigeon isn't already dead by the time the peregrines have caught it, they will use their beak to basically just dislocate the neck of the pigeon. And of course, then they will carry the kill back to their nests, but to feed their young. But of course, despite their speed, peregrines don't have a very good strike rate, with only 20% of attacks or 1 in 5 hunts ending in success. So they don't always manage to catch a pigeon, but of course they can't catch a pigeon easily on the flat, like in a flat-out chase, because pigeons can fly at 61 miles per hour and they have enormous hearts and lungs. So in a flat-out chase, they could outfly a peregrine. And you're probably wondering, why has the peregrine been my favourite animal for so many years? Well, I first came across the Peregrine Falcon when I was actually quite young. I was around about 6 or 7 years old, and I was at the Battle of Tintagel in Cornwall with my father. I was out walking among the stalls, like the medieval stalls, when I came across a falconry stand, and I saw the peregrine for the first time, and I don't know what it was that completely enchanted me. It was probably like the beauty of that bird, and its eyes, its speed, and the way it flies. And when I actually got to hold the peregrine on my wrist, I just looked at the bird completely in awe. But also, when I learned a lot more about the peregrine, another thing that has always made me so interested in the peregrine is that the peregrine was the was the second bird that was most commonly used in falconry in the medieval times, because that was flown by, the male peregrine, who's a third smaller, was flown by the squire, who were called the male peregrine, the trice bird. And then the female, who was much larger, was flown by the prince. Now, and the prince was a gentleman, so the female falcon, or the female peregrine, was known as the falcon gentle. And since then, I've seen peregrines in falconry and in the wild for many, many years. In fact, just about 10 years ago, I went to Belper in Derbyshire, where I actually got to see best view I've ever had of urban peregrines, and there were 2 adult birds and 3 fledgling youngsters, and one was feeding on a pigeon, and the juveniles even tried to go after a flock of pigeons. And of course it was the best bird watching day of my life. And that is basically how this magnificent bird became my favourite animal. Now, where can you see peregrine falcons in the wild? As I said, they're found in many parts of the world, but in Britain you can see them all over Britain. I mean, usually in places like either the wilds of Wales or here in Cheddar Gorge right in southern England, because that's a good place to see rural peregrines. But many cities in Britain have a very big peregrine peregrine population. In fact, the second largest number of urban peregrines is found here in London. But of course, the country with the most, basically what I'm trying to say is that the city with the largest urban peregrine population is New York in America. But yeah, that has been my refilming of this PowerPoint on Peregrine Falcon. If you want to see more about Peregrine, check out my 20 Animals of Britain PowerPoint presentation, but also my PowerPoint presentation on falconry. Thank you.